In the wake of a mass shooting tragedy, a common theme resurfaces in political discourse: the idea of banning assault rifles. I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment, but mass shootings are some of the most challenging times to hold firm in the belief that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The most challenging type of mass shooting is the school shooting, where unthinkable tragedy and loss is visited upon some of the most vulnerable and innocent members of our society.
Look at me and tell me guns were the factor in the hunting of our kids in this school this week. And look at me and tell me you accept it and you will work with us to do something about guns. Senator Rubio, my daughter, running down the hallway at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas was shot in the back.
Yes, sir.
With an assault weapon, the weapon of choice.
Yes, sir.
Okay? It is too easy to get. It is a weapon of war. The fact that you can't stand with everybody in this building and say that, I'm sorry.
The daughter of the man speaking was recently murdered by a school shooter who used an assault rifle. His anger and grief are entirely understandable. Furthermore, I believe two things are obvious. First, that if the shooter could not get access to an assault rifle, he likely would have used a different weapon. And second, that if the shooter had used a different weapon, like a pistol or a knife, then fewer students would have been killed. In other words, the easy access people in our society have to assault weapons is definitely a contributing factor to the severity of mass shootings. How then can I oppose banning assault rifles? One thing that helps me reconcile my belief that assault rifles should not be banned in the wake of a school shooting is to put the magnitude of the loss into perspective. In 2017, last year, there were 15 people killed in school shootings. In 2016, 9 people were killed in school shootings. In 2015, 21 people were killed in school shootings. Now let's compare that to dog attacks. In a typical year in the United States, in 2017 for example, there were 39 people killed in fatal dog attacks. There are more people killed in dog attacks most years than in school shootings. Dog attack victims are typically babies, young children, or women. The news media will gorge itself on news of a school shooting for days or weeks, but the annual trend of more people dying in dog attacks gets comparatively little coverage. Pit bulls are involved in more than 70% of fatal dog attacks. If school shootings are a major reason to consider banning assault rifles, and dog attacks kill more children most years than school shootings, why can't we bring at least equal focus and political will towards banning pit bulls, as is currently being aimed at banning assault rifles? I expect that anybody who's lost a loved one in a school shooting would not appreciate my comparison to dog attack fatalities. They might think I'm trying to minimize their loss, but that's not what I'm trying to do at all. If your daughter is shot while fleeing a gunman in school, that is horrible and tragic, but it is as horrible and tragic as having your son be mauled and ripped apart while he runs down your driveway trying to escape the neighbor's pit bull. In other words, I'm trying to put the tragedy of a school shooting into perspective. For the families of victims, the scale of loss is beyond the power of words to convey. But that's true whether your child dies in a school shooting or a dog attack. From a social perspective, school shootings are nightmarish tragedies, but they kill fewer people than dog attacks. And most people don't think that dog attacks are a major social problem. We can acknowledge the horror and tragedy and loss of both events, school shootings and fatal dog attacks, while also simultaneously acknowledging that we should not remove or restructure foundational principles of the United States to address what are, from a statistical, mathematical, overarching view, relatively small problems from a social, civilizational level. And I know that sounds heartless, and I don't mean to minimize the loss, but when asking the question of how we can order society, we should consider not individual specific tragedies, but broad statistical themes. I looked for some arguments in favor of gun control. Here's an excerpt from one video that does a pretty good job presenting a case for gun control.
Equates to over 30,000 gun-related deaths per year, only about a third of which are homicides. The most common form of gun death, believe it or not, it's actually suicide, which is a fact that a lot of gun debates leave out. You buy your gun to protect yourself from an intruder, but what happens when you need to protect yourself from yourself?
Someone who disagreed with me might note that the number of people killed in school shootings is an extremely small subset of the number of people who are killed by guns. That's certainly true, but school shootings make up a disproportionate amount of the rhetorical energy used in favor of gun control. But let's think about the broader statistics. 30,000 deaths a year, about a third of which are homicides. A lot of gun control advocates throw around the 30,000 deaths per year figure, but they neglect that 2/3, or 20,000 of those deaths, are suicides, people killing themselves. That's significant because the US does not have a particularly high suicide rate compared to other countries that don't have easy civilian access to firearms. What this means is that 2/3 of gun deaths are not really relevant to discussing gun control, because without guns, we could reasonably expect these people to commit suicide by other means, stepping in front of a bus or off a building, hanging, poison, asphyxiating yourself with the exhaust from your car, etc. That cuts the number of relevant firearm deaths down to about 10,000 a year. To put that into perspective, that's about the number of people who die from uterine cancer. Some of these firearm deaths, though, are not things that should be prevented. For example, justified police or self-defenders killing dangerous criminals. And even less of these 10,000 deaths are caused by assault rifles. The New York Times writes, quote, "In 2012, only 322 people were murdered with a rifle of any kind, FBI data shows," end quote. And also, handguns, not assault rifles, but handguns were used in more than 80% of gun murders each year. But gun control advocates had failed to interest enough of the public in a handgun ban. Handguns were the weapons most likely to kill you, but they were associated by the public with self-defense. Assault rifles aren't even the most problematic type of gun. People want to ban them because they look and sound scary, and because their use is emphasized by the media when they are used in horrific mass casualty events. I referenced the number of people killed by fatal dog attacks. 74% of fatal dog attacks are perpetrated by pit bulls. The media's attention to assault rifles and the move to ban assault rifles is analogous to reflecting on the tragedy of fatal dog attacks and advocating for banning Labradors. Labradors are not a problem. Pit bulls are. Pit bulls kill most people who die in fatal dog attacks. Likewise with guns, assault rifles are not the problem. Assault rifles are not responsible for most murders. Handguns are. So why push to ban assault rifles?
If you look at the law and its definition, it basically bans 200 models of gun in this country, about 220 specific models of gun.
Good, good.
Okay? But it allows legal 2,000 other types of gun that are identical. Identical in the way that they function, in how fast they fire, in the type of caliber that they fire, in the way they perform. They are indistinguishable from the ones that become illegal. And the only thing that separates the two types, is if you put a plastic handle grip on one, it becomes banned. If it doesn't have a plastic handle grip, it does not become banned. So let me explain, if I may, just for a moment more.
Are you saying,
you
will start with the 200 and work your way up?
I would explain to you what has happened.
It's a place to start. We can do that.
Well, but let me.
Gun control advocates know that they won't be able to revoke the Second Amendment and start grabbing guns immediately. Instead, they intend to afflict the Second Amendment with a death by 1,000 cuts. They are trying to unravel the Second Amendment by attacking the right to bear arms at its edges. They just want to ban certain types of rifles, or bump stocks, or high-capacity magazines, or push the age you can buy rifles up, or whatever it is in this current moment. They want to constrict your right to bear arms with an ever-growing array of restrictions, until eventually you won't be able to get any kind of gun at all. That's why when Marco Rubio points out the absurdity of banning specific types of guns due to a plastic pistol grip, The gun control advocate is nonplussed. He wants to start with some guns, any kind of guns, and move out from there, banning more and more. With the particular gun control advocate I just showed, I have absolutely no malice or ill will towards him. He's recently lost his daughter, and as far as I'm concerned, he has the right to be passionate about wanting to ban the things that killed his daughter. I'd understand if someone had a child killed by a dog and they wanted to ban dogs too. I'd understand, but I wouldn't agree. I have less charitable feelings towards the duplicitous politicians or TV pundits who are not aggrieved by personal tragedy, but are instead looking to exploit tragedies in order to trick Americans into abandoning one of their most sacred and foundational rights. So why do we need assault rifles at all? Arguments in favor of sport or hunting aren't compelling to me personally. If bowling killed hundreds of non-bowling people a year, I would not be arguing that we need to keep bowling legal, even though there are many bowling enthusiasts out there and I enjoy bowling from time to time myself. Instead, there are only two reasons why we need assault rifles. The first reason is defense. Different types of guns are useful in different types of defense scenarios. A pistol or revolver is a good choice to carry on you, a shotgun is a good choice for many people for home defense, and an assault rifle might be the right choice for someone in a rural environment where dangerous animals were a threat in addition to dangerous humans. Guns are tools, and different types of tools are appropriate in different circumstances. We should not be telling people that they don't need a specific kind of tool, but instead we should let responsible citizens assess their own circumstances and pick the tool that's right for their job, and in some cases that tool may well be an assault rifle. And of course there is a different type of defense, the defense of yourself and your family against oppressors. Being sufficiently well armed means that you have the ability to escalate a disagreement, and provided you have your guns and ammunition available to you, it means you will not be required to suffer indignity worse than death. The example of Rotherham in the UK is what I think of when people question the need for an assault rifle for defense.
More than 1,400 young girls were abused over a period of 16 years, mainly by men from the town's Pakistani community, a community where any hint of abuse was routinely underreported. When she was abused in her hometown of Skipton, that's about 60 miles from Rotherham, she was just 10. Of these 1,400 girls, nearly all of them were white.
And the cases there were incredibly brutal. These women were raped, they were burnt with cigarettes, they had the same kind of abuse that the girls in Rotherham had. And so
Wikipedia refers to Rotherham as a decades-long organized child sex abuse that was unchallenged by legal authorities. Quote, from January 2011, Andrew Norfolk of The Times pressed the issue, reporting in 2012 that the abuse in the town was widespread and that the police and council had known about it for over 10 years, end quote. The government, the authorities, the police, they knew about this widespread sexual abuse targeting young girls, and they did nothing about it until a reporter from a different country came and pressed the issue. Also from Wikipedia, quote, a common thread was that taxi drivers had been picking the children up for sex from care homes and schools. The abuse included gang rape, forcing children to watch rape, dousing them with petrol, and threatening to set them on fire, threatening to rape their mothers and younger sisters, and trafficking them to other towns, end quote. There were 1,400 young girls. The reporter in this clip I just showed says the girls were mostly white girls, which is important because it means the actual number of victimized girls is much larger, but the Pakistani girls just are not coming forward because of cultural taboos. So we know of 1,400 young British girls who were abducted, raped, exploited, tortured horribly in this British town. And this went on for decades, and the townspeople and the government and the police knew about it. So this is what I meant earlier when I said if you are well armed, then the worst indignity you will have to suffer is your own death. If it were my family, my sister, my daughter, my niece, my cousins, who were being treated in the horrific way that the girls in Rotherham were being treated, I would have complained to the police, and if I were ignored, I would have complained to the federal police, to the city council, or the news, and if I were still ignored, if no one wanted to do anything about my family getting tortured and raped, Well, I won't indulge in fantasies about being an action hero, but I will observe that high-quality, combat-effective weapons would give me the option to escalate my disagreements with the rapists and the town officials. In Britain, they ignore child rape and pretend it doesn't happen because they don't want to seem racist. I would bet that the next police commissioner would be more inclined to risk being considered racist if his predecessor had met a violent death at the end of an upset parent's AR-15. And again, the city council may not vote to continue to ignore child rape if they had to contend with the assault rifles of upset constituents. You need weapons not just to defend yourself and your property from animals, from burglars or violent criminals. You also need weapons to defend yourself from the horrific injustice that your government may perpetrate against you out of laziness or cowardice. If you are not a credible threat to your government, they simply will not care about your well-being. The second reason you need assault rifles is the original reason the right to bear arms was ensured to citizens. There is a possible scenario where revolution would be justified, and if so, assault rifles, weapons of war, similar to the ones we arm our battlefield soldiers with, will have a role to play in the revolution. Thus, citizens who will carry out the revolution need access to assault rifles.
Isn't the Second Amendment on the books so that we can defend ourselves against our government should they infringe upon our rights? Without guns, we're defenseless if Washington turns on us. Yes, that is inherently true. But the U.S. military spent $598.5 billion last year alone. No matter what kind of private arsenal a civilian can accrue, no matter what level of training they can acquire, a civilian or a group of civilians cannot effectively defend themselves against a government that can drone strike them into oblivion. The federal government has 7,000 drones in their arsenal, with Predator and Reaper drones that cost $2,500 to $3,000 per hour to fly. And the 2016 budget for federal drone research and production is some $2.9 billion. The fact is, if there was ever a war between our well-armed militia and the US government, we already lost.
This is a rebuttal argument that you are likely to hear a lot if you argue about gun control. The government is so well equipped, says the gun control advocate, the government is so well equipped that our paltry rifles will be of no use. People who make this argument are apparently unaware of the success of groups armed primarily with small arms, like the North Vietnamese when fighting against the United States, or the Mujahideen when fighting against the USSR, or ongoing resistance to the United States in the Middle East. All of these examples incorporated a lot of men with small arms resisting technologically, economically, and militarily superior forces. However, this argument is simply preposterous on its face. Imagine that, for whatever reason, the time for revolution has come, and you are the leader of the revolution. Will your first order be throw away your assault rifles because you clearly have no use for them? Or would you think that maybe, just maybe, holding on to the assault rifles might prove useful? People who make this kind of argument must be imagining revolutionaries lining up in the streets with their revolution uniform on and waiting to get blown up by the next passing drone. They never imagine that the revolution might go down like a sympathizer snaps a picture of a drone pilot who's eating at a cafe. The sympathizer shares it on an encrypted and steganographic network. The drone pilot is identified with facial recognition or with help from people on the network, and that night, as the drone pilot goes back to his home, a group of revolutionaries show up and murder him and his entire family. If that happens 100 times or 1,000 times, how badly do you think people will want to volunteer for drone piloting missions? Or maybe the people who work in the factories that make the drones will get tired of being shot by snipers. Maybe mid-level government bureaucrats will get tired of people shooting them on their way to, from, or at work. If tens of millions of well-armed Americans decide to start violently resisting the government, then the government would have no chance at stopping the revolution. Guns in general, and assault rifles as a particularly valuable class of those guns, give the American citizenry the ability to overthrow their government. More than any reason, this is why we cannot and should not give up our right to carry assault rifles. Political power comes from the barrel of a gun. Giving up assault rifles is an abdication of your political power. There is a reason that the government authorities in Rotherham can simply shrug when their citizens report the rape of their children. They do not care because their citizens have no power. Do not give up your political power because you may not like the people who take it from you. If you enjoyed this video, then please let me know by clicking the like button. If you're interested in seeing more content in a similar style, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for your time.